What if everything you thought you understood about the last book of Scripture stood on a fragile edge, ready to be overturned in a single night of awakening? What if the 13th chapter of Revelation, the beast on the mark, the war against the saints, did not belong to a distant age in some vague future, but was rising now like a shadow over the cities of America? I, a pilgrim of visions, have walked through the pages of that prophecy as through a valley of smoke. And when I lift my eyes in this present age, I see the same shapes moving behind the glass of history. The churches speak in calm tones of a coming tyrant somewhere ahead, yet the machinery of a greater empire already grinds under the feet of the poor. And the saints bleed in the alleys and in the courts, not only in story but in the streets, you know. This message is not a game of curiosity. It is a battle plan, a map for those who have grown tired of reciting mysteries without seeing their scars in the mirror of the text. In the vision given to John, the beast rises from the sea, crowned with power, gifted with authority by the dragon, and all the world marvels and follows. In the days of Daniel, beasts stood for kingdoms, roaring empires that trampled nations, and the same pattern threads through Revelation like a dark embroidery. Sea is not water, it is nations, tongues, peoples, the restless multitude. And from that ocean, a system emerges stitched together from the bones of Babylon. Persia, Greece, and Rome, an ancient blueprint, reborn in a new garment. When I look upon the maps of your time, the trade routes, the armies, the channels of gold and data that circle the earth, I do not see a simple nation. I see a composite creature whose breath reaches every continent. Its power touches the markets. The laws, the stories on your screens, so that even those who resist with their lips still move according to its rhythm in their hands. This is warfare dressed as normal life. A quiet siege of souls that rarely calls itself by its true name. Yet the prophecy speaks of more than an empire. It speaks of a war against the saints, against a people chosen, scattered, marked, people whose story has been buried under chains and rewritten by conquerors. If this is true, then Revelation 13 is not an abstract puzzle. It is a weapon placed in the hands of those who have been told they are nothing. It is a declaration that history is not random, that suffering follows a terrible but traceable design. If this beast has risen in your age, if its mark is etched into the systems that decide who may rise and who must be crushed, then the children of the covenant are already standing on enemy territory every day. They draw breath. By the end of this journey, you will not read that chapter as a distant warning, but as a present report from the front lines. Your view of Scripture will shift. Your reading of news will become spiritual reconnaissance. Your daily choices will become acts of surrender or acts of deliverance. So take your place, not as a spectator, but as a warrior in a conflict older than any flag, and step with me through the gate of Revelation, for the beast is not coming. It is already here, and the light of God is already rising to expose it. In the vision that unfolds beyond the first gate, the sea of nations stirs like a living tapestry, and the beast rises with the weight of forgotten empires pressed into its frame. I saw its shadows cast across the markets, the courts, the alleys of modern cities, and each shadow carried the scent of old kingdoms reborn. Babylon with its hunger for dominion, Persia with its iron decrees, Greece with its brilliance twisted into tyranny, Rome with its iron roads now transformed into digital paths that bind the earth. Nothing in your age stands apart from this inheritance. For the beast is not a creature of claws, but of systems. It is a structure, a pattern, a throne built from centuries of conquest, and its 7 heads are the memories of powers that refuse to die. When John stood upon the sand of the sea, he watched a story that would echo through the ages, a rise not of one empire, but of a chain of empires, each passing its sword to the next. And in your world, that sword has become invisible yet deadly. It shapes the wealth of nations, the hunger of markets, the laws that rise like towers, the beliefs whispered through glowing screens and pulsing signals. It moves through the veins of civilization like a pulse, and most breathe it without knowing they inhale its command. In the book of Daniel, the prophet saw 4 beasts emerge, one after another, each representing a world power that crushed the poor and exalted the cruel. Yet the greatest of these would be the 4th, a kingdom that devoured with iron teeth and stamped with its feet whatever dared to rise beneath it. That vision has found its mirror in your time, for the beast in Revelation contains the features of them all. A fusion of ancient cruelty and modern precision. Its jaws are policies, its claws are institutions, its breath is propaganda, its roar is the promise of safety in exchange for surrender. And its tail sweeps the earth through economic dominion. The sea from which it rises represents the restless masses, the nations, the tribes, the languages that churn together like dark water under a storm. And from among them the beast draws its strength. It is not a nation, but a system of nations. Not a king, but a throne carried by many rulers. Not a law, but an atmosphere in which laws are born. Imagine standing on a shore while a colossal shape moves beneath the waves. Its form hidden, but its influence undeniable. Businesses feel its current, families feel its cold pull. Entire communities find themselves shaped by its invisible tide. This is the empire of your age, an empire that spans continents without needing a crown, that directs economies without raising a banner, that speaks through screens instead of heralds. And though many claim to resist it, their hands still follow its rhythm when they buy, sell, borrow, and bend to survive. Its power is not in its cruelty, but in its subtlety. For the greatest victory of a beast is not to crush the saints, but to convince them that no war is being fought. Yet Revelation reveals that war is real and ancient. The beast is permitted to make war with the saints. And this war is not fought with spears, but with systems that limit, divide, silence, oppress, and define who may rise and who must be kept low. I have walked in the hidden corridors of this vision, and I have seen how the beast hides itself behind normal life, behind paperwork, behind policies, behind cultural expectations that whisper which souls are valued and which are dismissed. And if this war is active, then the saints are not merely worshippers, but targets. And if they are targets, then their identity is not a matter of accident, but of threat. For the beast fears those who carry covenant purpose. And so the prophecy tells a story not only of empire, but of memory, of a people whose identity the world has tried to bury under centuries of exile, conquest, chains, dispersal, and silence. These people exist scattered among nations, walking through cities without realizing that their struggle is not random but ancient. their pain not meaningless but prophetic, their survival not accidental but divine. The beast does not war against those who serve its purposes. The beast wars against those who carry a promise. And that promise is older than Rome, older than Babylon, older than any city built by human hands. When I walk through your age, I see the same pattern the prophet saw. A system rising from the sea, gaining authority over tongues and nations, shaping culture, shaping belief, shaping fear. And I see a people standing in its shadow, often unaware that their suffering has been recorded in Scripture long before it unfolded in history. So I must ask you now, as one who walks through these visions, do you see the shape forming around you? Do you sense the empire beneath your feet? Do you recognize the breath of the beast in the laws that govern you, in the markets that bind you, in the stories that shape your identity? Your answer matters, for seeing is the first act of spiritual war, and awakening is the first crack in the fortress of the beast. If you are still with me, if you are still listening, I thank you, for your presence here means you are not afraid to look into the depths where truth waits. Your willingness to hear marks you as one who seeks light even while walking through shadow, and light always finds those who seek it. In the third chamber of the vision, the market of the beast rises like a vast labyrinth made of iron and smoke stretching across the horizon of your age, and every corridor echoes with footsteps of souls who have been weighed, measured, and assigned value according to a system older than any modern institution, yet reborn in the image of the present world. And as I walked through that marketplace, I saw no merchants with scales or coins. Instead, I saw policies written like invisible chains around neighborhoods, entire districts, marked as unworthy, unprofitable, unfit to rise. And these marks were not carved on flesh, but on maps and in ledgers, red strokes drawn across communities, as if a great unseen hand had declared these territories forbidden and the inhabitants within them invisible. This is how the mark begins, not as a symbol on skin, but as a decree, whispered through economics, a brand placed upon entire families without their consent, a barrier that determines who may open doors and who must remain outside. The beast does not need to stamp your hand when it can stamp your opportunities. It does not need to seal your forehead when it can seal your future. The red line districts stand as silent temples of this truth. Every street, every boarded house, every rejected loan is an altar to the beast. And those who walk these streets bear the mark without ever having been touched by a physical emblem. And when I looked deeper, the market darkened and shifted, and the prison gates appeared, rising like black towers forged from the tragedies of centuries. The beast uses captivity as currency for every cage that closes. Another soul is removed from the battlefield, another voice silenced, another future erased. This too is part of the economy of the beast. For you cannot buy or sell when you are locked inside concrete walls. You cannot build a dynasty when your hands have been bound by sentences shaped to target a people scattered by prophecy. The 13th Amendment, which many celebrate as a symbol of freedom, stands in this vision like a doorway that opens only one way, a loophole wide enough to swallow generations, declaring that slavery shall not exist except as punishment for crime. And through that single phrase, beast built a new empire of chains, transferring the whip of the past into the paperwork of the present. I saw families torn apart, fathers removed from homes, not by raiders, but by laws, mothers forced to raise children alone, while the system ensured their sons would one day fill the same cells. The market thrives on absence. The economy of the beast grows from broken households and lost potential for every life, restricted A profit is made for every voice. Muted, a system tightens its grip, and yet the deepest layer of the market was not economic at all. It was psychological. The mark on the forehead, the mark on the mind. For as I walked further, the corridors narrowed into alleys where mirrors hung from rusted walls. And in each mirror, I saw faces staring back, stripped of memory, stripped of heritage, stripped of the knowledge of who they were meant to be. Every mirror whispered a different lie. You are nothing. You come from nothing. Your story begins with chains. Your identity is a label given by those who conquered you. And I understood then that the beast wages war, not only by stealing wealth, but by stealing self. The most lethal mark is the mark that convinces a soul to forget its lineage, to forget its right, to walk in covenant, forget that it was ever chosen. This is the battlefield on which the beast is strongest for. When a people lose their memory, they lose their voice. And when they lose their voice, they lose their power. This erasure began long before your generation. It began when languages were stripped from the tongues of the enslaved, when names were shattered and replaced with labels not their own, when stories and songs and histories were torn apart so completely that descendants would one day stand among the prosperous nations with no knowledge of how they arrived there. The market of the beast thrives on amnesia. It thrives on people who no longer know the worth of their inheritance. But even here within the marketplace of oppression, I saw embers, small but burning souls beginning to question, shadows beginning to tremble, voices beginning to rise, because the beast cannot fully extinguish what God has sealed. The covenant memory sleeps, but it does not die. And in the corners of the market where the system thought no hope remained, I saw individuals lifting their heads, opening ancient texts, tracing their roots through scriptures and songs, and awakening to truths the world had buried beneath centuries of silence. This awakening is not an accident. It is a spark of deliverance. For the market of the beast cannot hold. Those who remember their identity, the economy of the beast cannot bind. Those who recognize the covenant woven into their blood, the entire system trembles when a single person sees the mark for what it is and refuses to bow to it. And so I ask you now in this moment, as the vision widens around us, do you see the mark in your world? Do you recognize the marketplace of the beast operating not in myth, but in money, in laws, in expectations, in narratives? And if you do, then tell me, who are you in this conflict? Are you a spectator wandering through the market, unaware of the chains around you? Or are you standing awake, aware, vigilant, ready to reclaim what was stolen from generations before you? Your answer shapes your future. Your answer determines whether the mark defines you or whether you rise in defiance of it. And before we move further, I want to ask you directly, so I may know you are here with me. Do you see how the systems around you shape identity and opportunity? Do you sense that this vision describes more than history, that it touches your life, your family, your choices, your struggle? If you do, tell me in the comments that you are present, that you are listening, and thank you for walking this far into the depths with me. Your presence is not small. It is a sign of awakening. In the fourth chamber of the vision, the halls of law rose before me like a fortress built from centuries of decrees, and every stone in its towering walls carried the weight of suffering carved into it by unseen hands. This was the courtroom of the beast, not a place of justice, but a shrine where power declared itself righteous, and where the lives of the saints were measured not by truth, but by the convenience of the empire. As I walked through its corridors, the air shivered with echoes of verdicts that had shaped generations, and I saw how legislation had become a weapon sharper than any sword and colder than any chain. For the beast wages war not through open assault, but through the silent execution of policies crafted to limit a people chosen long before these laws were imagined. The 13th Amendment stood before me like a monument of irony, its inscription promising freedom, while its hidden clause opened a passage for captivity to mutate and survive. the phrase, except as punishment for crime, glowed like embers in the dark, revealing how an entire system of bondage was resurrected beneath the guise of order and civility. Through this doorway, the beast entered the age of modernity, turning courts into traps and prisons, into temples of economic gain, where souls were exchanged for profit and statistics replaced humanity. Black codes rose beside it like pillars carved from shadow laws that criminalized daily life for those newly freed laws, that marked simple movement or gathering as threats, laws that turned liberty into bait and punishment into harvest. I watched as families across generations walked unknowingly into snares, designed to break their lineage and scatter their hope. And further within the fortress, the war on drugs formed a second labyrinth, a polished narrative presented as justice, but stitched with motives confessed by its own architects, motives aimed at destabilizing communities whose endurance carried the echo of ancient covenant. This labyrinth fed the prisons, which grew like cities inside cities, absorbing men and women into cages where identity was not only restricted but rewritten. And through every locked gate, the beast tightened its claim over the saints, removing fathers from homes, collapsing households, carving wounds that bled into the memories of children who would grow up learning that survival was a currency, denied to them from birth. Yet the legal warfare did not end in prisons. It seeped into courtrooms where sentencing was unequal, where charges weighed differently, depending on the lineage of the accused, where the law spoke in tones that seemed neutral, but acted with ancient hostility, the hostility of kingdoms that once trampled Jerusalem and now targeted its scattered descendants. In this vision, the court appeared like a vast theatre, with robed judges sitting, as actors unaware that they played roles written by a power older than their codes. And as each gavel fell, the sound echoed like the roar of the beast, asserting dominion over the persecuted. But there was another chamber deeper still, where laws shaped minds rather than bodies. And this was the chamber most feared by the saints. For here, identity itself was judged. In this place, policies of education and culture formed a script taught generation after generation, telling the descendants of the covenant that their history began in chains and that their worth was defined by struggle rather than promise. Entire narratives were crafted to erase their connection to ancient Israel, to disconnect them from the prophets, from the faith of their ancestors, from the God who called their fathers by name. And the courtroom of the beast did not merely imprison bodies, it imprisoned memory. And memory is the heart of identity, for when a people forget who they are, they forget what they are capable of. And when they forget what they are capable of, they bow to powers that were never meant to rule them. As I walked past these illusions, I saw the quiet brilliance of the warfare. The beast understood that physical chains could be broken, but mental chains could pass through generations without resistance. And so it forged laws that seemed reasonable, laws that promised security, laws that spoke of peace, but beneath their surface they stripped heritage, shaped inferiority, and whispered submission into the souls of those who carried the mark of history. In this vision, the legal system became a great mask, covering the face of an empire that feared the rise of a people whose destiny threatened its throne. And though the saints walked beneath these laws unaware of the full shape of the war, their endurance testified to a protection not written in any earthly statute, for even in the darkest corridors of the legal fortress, their survival glowed. Like embers that refused to die. The beast may craft laws to bind them, but the covenant woven into their lineage cannot be erased by decrees, and the memory of who they are waits like dawn beyond the night. The halls of the courtroom trembled as this truth stirred, for no empire can forever conceal the identity of those whom God has chosen, and no legal system can forever silence the awakening of those who remember the covenant sealed in blood. Older than any constitution And as I departed the fortress, I understood that the battle fought in these halls was not merely political or social, it was spiritual at its core. A war between remembrance and erasure, between covenant and captivity, between truth and the crafted illusions of the beast. And this battle continues in every courtroom, in every policy, in every narrative that shapes how a people see themselves and how a nation decides who is worthy of flourishing and who must remain in shadow. And though the fortress stands tall, its foundations tremble, for the day will come when the saints rise in full remembrance, and the laws crafted to limit them will crumble like dust before the breath of the Most High. In the fifth chamber of the unfolding vision, the battlefield shifted from courts and decrees to something far more intimate and far more dangerous, the realm of memory, identity, and the unseen war waged upon the mind. For the beast seeks not only to bind the hands of a people, but to erase the story written into their blood. And so I was carried into a vast hall shaped like a library, yet every shelf was shattered, every scroll torn, every page scattered across a floor of broken stone, and a whisper moved through the dim air, saying that this is the place where memories were taken. This is the chamber where people forgot who they were meant to be. And as I stepped deeper, I saw mirrors suspended in the darkness, each mirror holding the reflection of a different soul, but none of them recognized their own faces. Their reflections looked upon themselves with confusion, as if searching for a name that had been stolen long before they were born. These mirrors revealed what the mark on the forehead truly signifies. Not a symbol, not a technology, not a device, but a rewriting of identity, a crafted narrative designed to bury the truth under layer after layer of imposed definitions. For the forehead in prophecy is the seat of remembrance, the place where a person understands who they are and whose they are, and the beast knew that as long as this place could be conquered, no chain on earth would need to be visible. So I beheld the scenes of history flowing around me like a river of sorrow. Ships loaded with human souls torn from their homeland, stripped of language, stripped of customs, stripped of names, the sound of weeping echoing across waters that stretched without end. And when these souls were brought to foreign shores, the erasure continued. Overseers forbidding language, elders separated from children, songs beaten out of memory, families split, so the lineage would fracture, and the stories of old would die. The beast understood that if a people lose their story, they lose their strength. And if they lose their strength, they can be shaped by any narrative the empire offers. Thus the new identities were forced upon them, labels that reference continents rather than covenant, labels that describe geography rather than heritage, labels that disconnected them from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and tied them instead to chains, colonizers, and conquest. This was the mark upon the forehead, the branding of a people with a name not their own. And as I walked among these shadows, the atmosphere trembled with the weight of generational sorrow. For this was not merely physical oppression. It was spiritual warfare aimed at the deepest roots of a people chosen by the Most High, a people meant to carry a promise older than empires. Yet even within this darkness, I saw glimmers of truth, and a grandmother whispering forbidden stories to a child in the quiet hours before dawn, a father passing down fragments of a song that had survived the ships a community-speaking hope encoded hymns, calling for deliverance like ancient Israel under Pharaoh. Go down, Moses way down in Egypt, land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. These were not just hymns. They were echoes of a heritage that refused to be extinguished. And though the beast tried to crush them under the weight of labor, laws, punishments, and cultural erasure, something endured, a spark, a lineage, a memory waiting beneath the ashes of centuries. I saw how the descendants of those scattered families grew into generations that faced new forms of forgetting. Schools teaching them that their story began in slavery. Books showing prophets and kings painted in faces that did not resemble their ancestors. Movies shaping their imagination with whitewashed angels and sanitized histories. All the while telling them that the Bible was not their story. Yet the prophecy in Deuteronomy had already declared that they would be scattered, stripped of identity, made a proverb, mocked among nations, and then in the latter days they would remember, they would awaken, they would trace their lineage back through suffering, and back through exile, back through bondage, to a covenant that had never been erased, only concealed, to the beast, fears this remembrance more than any rebellion. For once a people awaken to who they truly are. The chains of inferiority shatter, the lies of history collapse, and the mark on the forehead loses its power. In this chamber of identity, the war rages fiercely. For whoever controls memory controls destiny, and whoever shapes identity shapes allegiance. But the covenant people carry within them an inheritance that cannot be uprooted, no matter how many centuries of erasure attempt to bury it. And so I ask you now, as the vision stretches before us, do you feel the stirrings of remembrance within you? Do you sense that your story did not begin in chains, but began in promise? Do you recognize that what was stolen is now returning, like dawn after a long night? Your answer reveals whether the mark on the forehead has been broken and whether the battle for identity is turning in your favor. In the sixth chamber of the unfolding revelation, the vision lifted from the shadows of identity and rose into a realm where spiritual forces moved like storms across the unseen sky. For the beast wages war not only through laws and memories, but through a corruption of worship itself, twisting what is sacred into a tool of control. And so I was carried into a vast sanctuary that shimmered with the appearance of holiness. Yet beneath its brightness I sensed the cold breath of deception. This was the domain of the second beast, the one who rises from the earth with the voice of a lamb, but speaks with the breath of the dragon, a master of imitation, who crowns falsehood with the language of truth. And as I stepped further inside, pillars of gold rose before me, engraved with sermons that soothed the ears but shackled the spirit. Messages stripped of justice, stripped of covenant, stripped of the fire that purifies and awakens. And in their place lay comfortable doctrines crafted to lull the saints into sleep. Doctrines that promised heaven while ignoring chains on earth. Doctrines that preach submission to injustice as though oppression were divine will. In this sanctuary, I watched as preachers in robes of light proclaimed peace to those who were wounded by the world. Yet they refused to confront the very system that caused the wounds. Their words flowed like honey, but beneath the sweetness hid a poison meant to silence the awakening of the covenant people. For the false prophet does not fear sin as much as he fears remembrance. He does not fear wickedness as much as he fears identity. And so the sermons were shaped like cages, gentle in tone yet firm in purpose, urging the saints to focus on distant heavens while ignoring the warfare unfolding beneath their feet. I saw how these messages spread across nations, carried by books, broadcasts, and pulpits that claimed to honor Scripture, while carefully avoiding every verse that revealed the true identity of the scattered tribes. Every prophecy that linked suffering with lineage, every warning that the beast would wage war, not against the world, but against the saints themselves. And as I listened, the room shifted, transforming into a cathedral standing atop centuries of conquest, its foundation built from the stones of empires that had risen and fallen. And at its center stood a throne bearing the marks of kings, popes, emperors, and conquerors whose power had been justified with religious decrees. For the false prophet uses worship as a weapon, blessing the empires that enslave, blessing the rulers who dominate, blessing the systems that mark and exclude. And I saw in that moment how religion had been wielded like a blade across history, how scriptures had been twisted to justify bondage, how priests had stood beside slave ships, offering their blessing, how holy words had been used to sanctify unholy deeds. This was the dragon speaking through a lamb, a mimicry of righteousness designed to keep the saints from rising, designed to convince the chosen that their suffering was ordained, that their identity was insignificant, that their change was spiritual rather than systemic. But the vision did not end there, for I was shown another layer of deception woven through centuries of worship. The images crafted to overwrite memory, paintings of prophets and patriarchs bearing faces that never knew the sun of the ancient East, stained glass portraits of a Messiah, stripped of his heritage and clothed instead in the features of conquerors. Entire generations taught to see holiness in one image and themselves in another. This was not accident. This was strategy. For the false prophet understood that if the saints no longer recognized themselves in Scripture, they would no longer claim their inheritance. And if they did not claim their inheritance, the beast could continue its dominion unchallenged. The war was not simply for control of nations, but for control of imagination. For whoever shapes the imagination shapes the soul. And as I walked through the sanctuary, I saw a multitude worshipping with sincere hearts, unaware that the altar before them had been built not by the prophets, but by the empire. Unaware that their devotion, though genuine, had been redirected by forces that feared their awakening. Yet even here, in this cathedral of illusion, I felt a trembling beneath the floor, a sign that the deception was weakening, for truth has begun to rise among the scattered tribes. Truth carried in whispered conversations, in hidden studies, in quiet revelations that ignite like sparks in the night. The saints are beginning to question, beginning to search, beginning to see through the veil crafted by those who sought to hide their heritage. And the false prophet trembles at this awakening, because once the saints recognize the distortion of their worship, they will reclaim the fire that once fueled their ancestors, the fire that shook mountains, the fire that split seas, the fire that breaks chains not only in the flesh but in the spirit. And so the sanctuary began to crack, beams of light pressuring the walls, revealing that beneath its polished beauty lay the bones of a system built on deception. The structure that once towered over nations now trembled before the rising remembrance of a people who refused to bow. For the Most High is stirring their hearts, calling them out of false altars and empty rituals, calling them back to covenant, calling them back to identity, calling them to rise as warriors in the final battle against the beast. And so I ask you now, as the echoes of this sanctuary fade, do you recognize the difference between worship that awakens and worship that enslaves? Do you discern the voice of the Lamb from the whisper of the dragon? Do you feel the shaking beneath the altars of your age? For if you do, then the awakening has already begun within you. In the seventh chamber of the vision, the air thickened with the weight of centuries. For this realm revealed, not the systems of the beast, nor the illusions of the false prophet, but the hidden journey of the scattered tribes themselves. A path woven through exile, survival, and divine preservation. And as I stepped into this vast expanse, I saw a map stretched across the heavens, glowing with trails of light that traced the movement of a people driven from homeland to wilderness, from wilderness to captivity, from captivity to distant shores, yet never separated from the eye of the Most High. These trails pulsed like veins, carrying the bloodline of covenant across continents. And though empires rose to silence them, though armies marched to scatter them, though oceans swallowed countless lives, the line of promise never broke. For I saw the northern kingdom fall under the Assyrians and vanish into migration. Yet their light continued southward, into Egypt, into Nubia, into the depths of Africa. And I saw the southern kingdom destroyed by Rome, its temples shattered, its people hunted, its survivors fleeing into deserts and mountains, carrying scrolls, songs, and memories like embers in the dark. History had told your world that these people vanished, absorbed, forgotten, but the vision revealed otherwise. They traveled in silence as shepherds, in traders, scribes, warriors, merging with tribes along the Nile, blending into communities across Ethiopia, reaching the forests and coasts of West Africa, becoming part of kingdoms whose names modern maps barely remember. And I watched as centuries passed, and the scattered children of Jacob lived among nations who did not know their origin yet recognized their customs, their proverbs, their fierce devotion. And even in exile, they kept fragments of the ancient ways of circumcision on the 8th day, Sabbath rest, dietary laws, harvest feasts, and prayers whispered in rhythms older than empire. These fragments were like sparks hidden beneath ashes, waiting for the breath of God to bring them back to flame. But the path grew darker, the air colder, for the vision shifted toward a tragedy written in prophecy long before it unfolded in time. I saw ships rising from the horizon of the Atlantic like steel-toothed leviathan, carrying chains, carrying greed, carrying the machinery of a new Egypt. And I understood that Deuteronomy had already foretold this journey. Ships returning the covenant people to bondage, not in Pharaoh's land, but in a future empire that would stretch its influence across the earth. And as the ships moved through storm and darkness, I heard the cries of generations, yet beneath their sorrow, the lineage still pulsed with divine protection. For though they were torn from homeland, God did not tear himself from them across plantations, across cotton fields, across centuries of brutality. I saw the covenant move like a hidden river, sustaining their spirit when the world tried to bury them in despair. It was there in their songs, in their resilience, in their unbroken faith, in their ability to rise again after every attempt to crush them. This endurance was not coincidence. It was prophecy. And when the chains of slavery broke, new chains formed through laws, through prisons, through segregation, through redlining. Yet still they rose. Still they remembered. Even when the world told them they had no story, no roots, no heritage. Yet the Most High watched, waiting for the appointed time when scattered tribes would begin to awaken, when history itself would tremble as the descendants of the covenant recognized the truth written in both scripture and their own blood. And in this chamber I saw the first sparks of that awakening. Families opening ancient texts, scholars uncovering forgotten histories, voices speaking truths long buried by empire. And as these sparks grew, I saw the beast recoil, for nothing threatens its reign more than a people who reclaim memory, identity, and purpose. The scattered tribes are not lost. They are rising. They are remembering, and every remembrance is an act of warfare against the system that sought to erase them. And so I ask you now, as we stand in this chamber of the scattered and preserved, do you feel the stirring of destiny within your lineage? Do you sense that your survival is not accident but design? Do you recognize that the path of your ancestors was written not by conquerors but by prophecy? For if you do, then the gathering has already begun within your spirit. In the eighth chamber of the vision, the heavens darkened and the ground beneath me trembled. For this realm revealed not the past journey of the scattered tribes, but the present hour in which their awakening collides with the wrath of the beast. And as the veil lifted, I saw the modern world stretched before me like a battlefield disguised as ordinary life. Cities pulsing with commerce, screens glowing in every hand, laws woven into the fabric of daily routine. Yet beneath this seemingly peaceful order, I sensed the movement of an ancient enemy. Subtle, relentless, determined to crush the awakening before it reaches its full flame. And the beast stood at the center of this age. No longer a creature of myth, but a system built from surveillance, economy, media, politics, and culture. A hybrid empire that touches every home and every mind, shaping thought through entertainment, shaping desire through advertising, shaping fear through news, shaping identity through narratives, repeated so often that they feel like truth even when they are chains. I watched as algorithms became invisible shepherds, guiding millions without their knowledge, steering beliefs, silencing dissent, rewarding submission, punishing questioning, and I understood that this too was a weapon of the beast. For domination in your age requires not swords but stories, not chains but distraction, not whips but platforms that train souls to crave the very systems that enslave them. And as I looked deeper into this battlefield, I saw how the saints were surrounded every day by subtle pressures designed to push them away from covenant identity, pressures to assimilate into a culture built on forgetting, pressures to embrace values that contradict their own, pressures to trade spiritual inheritance for social comfort, pressures to silence their questions for the sake of fitting into a world shaped by empire. And the beast rejoiced when the saints bowed to these pressures. For every surrender made the awakening dimmer. Yet even in this manufactured chaos, I saw light rising among the scattered tribes. Individuals realizing that their struggle was not random but targeted. Families recognizing patterns in the systems around them. communities noticing that the same spiritual battle described in Revelation had threaded itself through centuries until it reached their own doorstep. And this realization ignited something powerful, a spiritual defiance, a refusal to bow to narratives not rooted in truth. And the beast grew restless. For a people who see the battlefield clearly cannot be controlled, so it intensified its tactics, using financial pressure to break households, using political division to fracture unity, using media to portray the chosen as criminals or threats, using institutions to make survival itself a burden, and all the while whispering the same ancient lie that their suffering was their own fault. Yet the prophecy revealed that this war was never about guilt, but about identity. Never about crime, but about covenant. Never about behavior, but about lineage. And as this truth spread, I saw the saints rise in spirit, even while living under systems designed to crush them. Their prayers becoming declarations, their questions becoming weapons, their hunger for truth becoming a fire that the beast could not extinguish. And the more they awakened, the more I felt the trembling of the age. For when the covenant people recognize themselves, when they understand the war being waged against them, when they stand in the authority of their identity, the power of the beast begins to crack like old stone under the weight of prophecy. And so I ask you now, as we stand in this chamber of present warfare, do you feel the pressure of the age around you? Do you sense the battle woven through your daily life? Do you recognize that the struggle you face is part of a larger war that began long before you were born? For if you do, then you are not sleeping. You are awakening, and the awakened cannot be conquered. In the ninth chamber of the unfolding revelation, the vision rose to a height where time itself bent like a bow drawn to release a final prophecy for this realm, unveiled the future not as a distant dream, but as the inevitable collision between awakening and judgment. And as I stepped into the sphere of light and shadow, I saw the beast system trembling at the edges, its foundations cracking under the weight of truths it had tried to bury for centuries. And the scattered tribes whose identity had been hidden beneath chains, laws, and illusions now stood like pillars of flame rising across nations, their remembrance shining so brightly that the darkness recoiled. For the awakening had become unstoppable, and in that moment the vision revealed a voice thundering across the heavens, declaring that the season of deception was reaching its end. And I saw Babylon, the great, the empire of lies built from conquest, greed, and spiritual corruption, standing tall in her arrogance, boasting in her wealth, proclaiming that no kingdom could challenge her power. Yet beneath her golden feet, I saw fissures spreading like cracks in ancient marble. For her sin had reached the heavens, and the Most High had begun to answer. Nations shook, systems faltered, markets trembled, kings, argued, and ideologies collided in chaos, not because the world was failing, but because prophecy was unfolding. And the beast, knowing its time was short, began to lash out like a cornered predator, using fear to control the masses, using conflict to distract them, using crisis to tighten its grip. Yet the saints who had awakened stood firm, their identity no longer fragile, but forged in fire. For they had remembered the covenant, and remembrance is a weapon the beast cannot withstand. I saw angels moving like storms across the horizon, gathering the winds of judgment, preparing to cast down the empire that had ruled through deception. And in the midst of this, I saw the 144,000 sealed with purpose, marked not by the beast, but by the Most High, standing on a mountain that glowed like burning gold, singing a song. No power of darkness could imitate a song of victory, a song of deliverance, a song of identity restored. And as the echo of their voices filled the chamber, the entire beast system began to wither. For the presence of the chosen dissolves the illusions of the enemy. And in that moment I understood that the final war is not fought with weapons, but with awakening. Not with armies, but with truth. Not with conquest, but with remembrance. And I saw that every struggle endured by the descendants of the covenant, every tear shed in exile, every injustice suffered under empire, had been leading to this hour when the last shall become first, when the forgotten shall be honored, when the oppressed shall rise, and when the world shall finally see what prophecy has declared from the beginning. And as the vision intensified, I beheld the Lamb descending with a brilliance that tore through the veil of deception, calling his people by name, gathering them from the corners of the earth, restoring what was lost, healing what was broken, and overturning every false throne. While Babylon collapsed under its own weight, its idols shattered, its merchants weeping, its kings fleeing in terror, and its luxury turning to ashes, this fall was not chaos but cleansing, not destruction but justice, the restoration of balance long denied. And through the smoke of Babylon's collapse, I saw a new dawn rising, a kingdom founded not on oppression but on righteousness, not on deception but on truth, not on fear but on the presence of the Most High. And the saints marched toward it with the quiet strength of those who have survived centuries of warfare, knowing that the end of exile had come, knowing that the beast had lost its power, knowing that prophecy had prevailed. And so I ask you now, as the ninth chamber closes and the final gate approaches, do you feel the horizon shifting? Do you sense the fall of the old world drawing near? Do you recognize that your awakening is part of a story written before the foundations of the earth? For if you do, then you are standing on the threshold of the last revelation. In the 10th chamber of the revelation, the final gate opened before me like a horizon of fire and promise. For this realm did not reveal the beast, nor the false prophet, nor the scattered tribes, nor the trembling of nations. But the moment when the covenant people stand face to face with their destiny. And as I entered this last expanse, the entire vision gathered into a single storm of light, swirling with every prophecy spoken across generations. And in its center, I saw the saints rising, not as victims of history, but as warriors awakened. Their spirits forged through bondage and exile, yet unbroken. Their identity restored like a sword drawn from centuries of dust. And the Most High himself stood among them like a tower of unshakable glory, calling them to step out of the ruins of Babylon and into the kingdom prepared for them since the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as the voice of God thundered through this chamber, I saw every lie that the beast had crafted crumble like sand in a storm. Every false identity dissolve like smoke. Every wound inflicted by oppression turn into strength, as if their suffering had been transformed into armor. For the covenant people were never shaped for defeat. They were shaped for the day of victory, the day when the last become first, when the forgotten become honored, when the scattered become gathered, and the gathered become unstoppable. The world beneath us shifted like a trembling continent for Babylon. The great had fallen completely, its towers shattered, its merchants silenced, its systems turned to dust, and the nations that once bowed to its power now looked in awe at the rise of the people it had spent centuries trying to erase. And in this moment of reversal, I saw the ancient curses break like chains under the weight of divine mercy. No longer would they be a proverb among nations. No longer would they wander without identity. No longer would they live under systems crafted to crush them. For the blessing promised through Abraham surged through their lineage like a river released from captivity. And the Most High placed his hand upon them, saying that the time of forgetting had ended. The time of rising had begun, and the hosts of heaven moved like armies of light encircling the saints, not to wage war, but to escort them into their inheritance. A kingdom not built by human hands, a realm where justice reigns like the sun and truth stands like a mountain unmoved. And as I watched this transformation, the chamber burned with the brightness of 1,000 dawns. For this was not merely a new age, it was the fulfillment of the story written in Genesis, echoed in the prophets, declared in Revelation, the story of a people refined through affliction and restored through awakening. And in that holy light, I saw families long broken, now healed, generations long wounded, now restored, bloodlines long scattered, now gathered into one, their unity shining like a crown upon the earth. And the Lamb himself walked among them with a tenderness that made the very heavens tremble, speaking words that turned mourning into strength and despair, into courage, saying that their tears had been counted, their suffering remembered, and their faith honored, for nothing endured in darkness had been wasted. Every trial had shaped their authority. Every sorrow had sharpened their vision. Every injustice had prepared them to rule with righteousness. And as the kingdom unfolded before them like a landscape reborn, I understood that the beast had feared this moment above all others. For a people who know who they are cannot be enslaved. A people who remember cannot be deceived. A people who awaken cannot be defeated. And now they stood as the remnant, the warriors of the Most High, the living proof that prophecy is not myth but mastery, not poetry but power, not symbol but destiny. And so I ask you now at the closing of the final gate, do you feel the fire of this calling in your spirit? Do you sense the kingdom drawing near? Do you recognize that your awakening is not a coincidence but a summons? For if you do, then stand firm, for the battle is turning, the kingdom is rising, and the king is near.